Like T.I. felt like he could poke his chest out towards the East Coast because he felt like Atlanta was under fire because of the so-called juggernauts from Atlanta was looking like they okaying rat. So now T.I. come out of his shit now and on some shit like, man, get the best nigga from New York. Let's go. You want to call the whole shit now because y'all niggas did bad? That's how I looked at the T.I. Nah. He said everybody. Flex got on his ass, Jim. He said everybody. He didn't just say Fifth. He said everybody. He said since Fifth don't want no smoke, anybody else from New York want this.
What if this whole T.I. and 50 Cent situation was never really about 50 at all? What if the loud shots, the slick interviews, the sudden chest puffing, and all that internet energy were really just smoke meant to send everybody looking in the wrong direction? Because right now, that is exactly the kind of conversation spreading online, and fans are not taking it lightly. People are starting to ask a very messy question. Did T.I. jump into public smoke with 50 Cent to pull attention away from the pressure building around Atlanta names like Young Thug and 21 Savage? And honestly, the timing is what has everybody side-eyeing this story. Because let's be real. One minute, the internet was deep in conversations about loyalty, street politics, industry alliances, and who was standing where after all the fallout around Atlanta's biggest names. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, T.I. starts talking spicy. 50 Cent starts doing what 50 Cent always does, and the entire conversation shifts. Just like that, fans stop debating one controversy.
Hey, all these people saying the streets and all this, I'm not with it. Because I am, you know, I'm a big part of the streets. You know, that's what my love is. That's what my genuine love is. They love me so much, you know, and I'm always speak up for the streets, bro. We talking about how it traumatized it. Yeah, it fucked up, but it made us success stories.
I don't know about that. I am the streets. I love the streets. I come from the streets. I ain't on all that shit. But about that, I ain't just like stop the violence. Same shit I've been on. Oh no, it's kind of like, I think people kind of confused.
Just 6 months ago, you out trying to shame Gunna. Now you can't shame Gunna, Gunna shame you. 21 Savage, we are not letting you off the hook that easy, cause your partner's told, you broke weak, broke the codes. Y'all never would.
And started obsessing over another. And now people are wondering if that was the whole point. Some fans are saying this was a calculated distraction. Others think it was an ego move gone too far. And then there are the people who believe this may have been a bigger Atlanta image play behind the scenes, with emotions running high and everybody trying to protect their side before the internet turned the city into a punchline. Because once people started connecting the dots, the theory got way darker than a simple rap beef. Interview 451, 544. Now throw in 50 Cent's history of trolling, T.I.'s habit of stepping in when Atlanta's pride is on the line, and all the whispers about who needed public support and who needed the spotlight moved somewhere else, and suddenly this isn't looking like random smoke anymore. It's starting to feel like a staged collision with bigger consequences behind it. Fans are shocked, timelines are split, and the internet is asking one dangerous question. If this beef was fake, then what exactly was T.I. trying to protect? Because if these reports and theories hold any weight at all, then what looked like
I ain't supposed to say it like that.
You shouldn't.
I supposed to say save the streets.
Yes.
We gotta save the streets.
Yeah.
We gotta get all the bullshit, all the crazy killer shit out of it, and put the love and the hustle back in the shit.
Not get this shit twisted. I'm trying to change my life. I'm trying to save the streets. I'm trying to stop all this crazy shit that be going on, this unnecessary shit. I'm trying to be a part of the solution, but don't get it twisted for a second. Do not think this shit sweet. Straight up.
Entertainment may have actually been damage control in disguise. The part that really has people talking is not even the so-called beef itself. It is the timing, the energy, and how suddenly the internet got redirected. Because before all of this started, the conversation online was already messy. Fans were debating Atlanta's image, arguing over loyalty, calling out contradictions, and dragging old statements back into the spotlight. People were already heated over who stood where, who folded, who stayed silent, and who suddenly wanted peace after spending years rapping like they would never bend. That tension was already there, and then somehow, right when the noise started getting louder, T.I. popped back into the center of the conversation with a whole different kind of smoke. And that is what made people stop and look twice. Because a lot of fans are now saying this did not feel organic. It felt too convenient. Almost like somebody looked at the temperature online and said, nah, we need a new headline immediately. And the easiest way to do that? Drag 50 Cent into it. Because if there is one thing everybody knows, it is that the second 50 Cent's name gets attached to anything, the internet turns into a war zone. Blogs pick it up, reaction channels start moving, fan pages start clipping every little comment, and suddenly the whole culture is staring at one issue, while another one quietly slips into the background. That is the theory anyway. And when people started going back through the timeline, the dots started looking way too close together for comfort. Because this was not just random chatter. There were already conversations bubbling around Young Thug, around 21 Savage, around Atlanta artists trying to reposition themselves publicly while fans were still holding on to old receipts. People were not just talking about music, they were talking about image, politics, loyalty, and who exactly was trying to rewrite the narrative before it got worse. Then boom, here comes T.I. talking like Atlanta spokesman again. And to be fair, that is not exactly new for him. T.I. has always carried himself like somebody who believes he has a responsibility to defend the city, protect the culture, and step in when Atlanta starts looking shaky in public. Whether people agree with that or not, that has always been part of his brand. He likes to speak from that elder statesman position, like he is the one who has to restore order when things get too messy. So when he started making noise around 50, some fans did not just see it as personal, they saw it as strategic. Because think about it, if Atlanta was catching heat online, and if the city's biggest names were starting to get questions in ways that felt embarrassing, what better way to change the topic than to create a regional moment? East Coast versus Atlanta, Old Guard versus Old Guard, legacy versus legacy, pride versus pride. That kind of conversation is loud enough to swallow everything else. And people noticed that almost immediately. One fan wrote, "Ain't it funny how nobody was talking about Thug and 21 for a minute once T.I. and 50 started going back and forth?" Another said, "This feels like a planned distraction because the city was getting cooked." And once that kind of theory gets moving online, it does not stay small. Everybody starts playing detective. Everybody starts acting like they are reading body language, decoding motives, and piecing together some industry chessboard behind the scenes. That is when the situation stopped feeling like normal internet drama and started feeling like a full-blown storyline. Because now fans were not just asking whether T.I. was really mad at 50, they were asking why he chose 50 specifically. And that is a very important question, because there are a lot of people in the industry T.I. could have gone at if he just wanted attention. But 50 Cent is different. 50 is not just a rapper. 50 is a walking media machine. If you say his name, he can turn a random comment into a 3-day internet storm with one post and a sarcastic caption. He knows how to embarrass people, stretch a moment, and make sure every blog is talking. So if your goal is to create noise fast, there are not many bigger buttons to press than 50 Cent. Which is why some fans think T.I. knew exactly what he was doing. They think he knew 50 would bite. They think he knew 50 would troll. And they think he knew the second 50 responded, all the attention would swing away from the uncomfortable conversations Atlanta was having and land on something way more entertaining. If that is true, then this was not just rap drama, it was media manipulation with a Southern accent. And honestly, what made the theory feel even more believable to people was how emotional everybody around it started acting. Because once family starts getting involved, once side characters start speaking, once sons and friends and random supporters start throwing little shots into the mix, the story starts looking less like one man venting and more like a coordinated atmosphere. Fans were saying the whole thing felt too crowded, too fast, too many voices, too much performance, too much energy for something that didn't even seem rooted in a real event. That is when the phrase fake smoke really started sticking. Because people were not buying the outrage, they were buying the rollout. And that is a huge difference. Somebody even said, "This doesn't feel like beef, this feels like branding." And honestly, that one line might explain why the conversation got so loud. Because if fans believe they are being emotionally manipulated into following a storyline, they get even more invested, not less. They start watching closer, listening harder, replaying old clips, digging up old interviews, and suddenly every little thing becomes suspicious. Like, why now? Why this topic? Why 50? Why all this energy when other situations were being met with silence? Those questions kept piling up, and the more they piled up, the harder it became for people to just accept this as random tension. Then came another layer that made the story even messier. Some people started saying this was not just about protecting Atlanta's image in general. They think this may have also been about protecting specific names from becoming the center of another ugly internet cycle. Because once fans start associating a city's biggest stars with confusion, contradiction, and messy public perception, it creates a cloud over everybody attached to that circle. And if T.I. really saw that happening, some people believe he may have stepped in not because he had to, but because he felt like somebody needed to redirect the pressure before it swallowed too many people at once. And if that is the case, then the emotional stakes were way bigger than people first realized, because now it's not just about one rapper talking tough. Now it's about legacy, city politics, alliances, and whether one public fight was used to keep deeper conversations from getting too uncomfortable. And if you think about it like that, the whole thing starts feeling less random by the second, especially when you remember that fans are not dumb anymore. They have seen too many industry playbooks. They know what a distraction cycle looks like. They know when a sudden beef appears right as another controversy is getting too hot. They know when a narrative gets replaced instead of resolved. And a lot of them are now saying that is exactly what happened here. But then there is the other side of the argument, and that is where it gets even more interesting. Because not everybody thinks T.I. was playing chess. Some people think he was playing defense because he was genuinely bothered. And
that changes everything. And if he really was genuinely bothered, then this stops being a clean little distraction theory and turns into something way more personal. Because there are fans who believe T.I. was not sitting in some room plotting headlines like a movie villain. They think he was watching Atlanta get clowned, watching people question the city's credibility, watching conversations spiral around names that have long been tied to the culture, and he simply snapped. Not because he had some secret rollout, but because his ego, his pride, and his whole King of the South identity got poked in the worst possible way. And to be honest, that explanation is not hard to believe either, because T.I. has always moved like somebody who takes Atlanta's image personally. When people disrespect the city, when they question the artists, when they act like the South needs validation, he tends to respond like it is an attack on his own house. And that is why this whole thing became so layered. Because whether you believe it was fake smoke or real emotion, both versions still point back to the same pressure point. Atlanta was under public heat, and T.I. looked like he felt responsible for answering it. That is where fans started saying the family was left divided too, because once a public figure starts carrying that kind of pressure, everybody around them gets dragged into the emotional mess. Suddenly, it's not just about what was said online. Now the people close to him are also dealing with the fallout, the jokes, the reactions, and the internet trying to turn every move into evidence. And that is exactly what seemed to happen here. Because once the back and forth got louder, the internet did what it always does. It started widening the camera. Fans were not just talking about T.I. anymore. They started bringing up King Harris, Damani, Tiny, old family moments, old clips, old controversies, old energy. They started dragging the whole household into the mood of the story, like they were all characters in some giant reality show episode. And when that happens, emotions run high fast, because public beef stops being public beef and starts feeling like family exposure. One fan literally wrote, "Why does every T.I. issue end up splashing on the whole family?" And that one question hit hard, because there's some truth in it. Whether he's speaking for the city, defending his legacy, or just trying to get loud, the blast radius around him is never small. It always pulls in extra people. And once those extra people get involved, fans stop focusing on the original point and start focusing on the spectacle, which ironically is exactly why the distraction theory got stronger. Because if the goal really was to create enough noise to bury another conversation, then all of that extra chaos would actually help. The more side drama, the more reactions, the more emotional spillover, the less oxygen there is for the original issue people were debating. And some fans believe that is why the whole thing escalated in such a weird way. Not necessarily because anybody wanted a real war, but because the louder it got, the more useful it became. That's a nasty thought if it's true, because that would mean the internet was not just reacting to a feud, it was being fed one. And the wild part is, people started saying 50 Cent may have known exactly what was happening too. Now that is where things get spicy. Because let's be real, 50 is not some clueless participant in internet chaos. If anything, he's one of the architects of it. He knows when people are trying to use his name. He knows when a moment is bigger than the surface story. And he definitely knows how to smell when somebody is trying to create relevance off his reactions. So once people started looking at it from that angle, another theory popped up. What if 50 saw through it from day one and still played along because it benefited him too? That would make this even messier. Because now you're not talking about one-sided distraction anymore. Now you're talking about two veteran media minds possibly feeding the same fire for different reasons. T.I. gets to look like Atlanta's defender, and 50 gets to stay in the center of another viral moment without really having to do much besides be himself. If that sounds cynical, welcome to the internet in 2026. And fans are cynical for a reason.
They have seen too many accidental feuds that conveniently show up right when attention starts slipping. They have seen too many artists rediscover their voices the second controversy threatens to define them. And they have definitely seen too many moments where real tension and promotional energy start blending together until nobody can tell the difference anymore. That is why this story kept sticking, because it sat right in that gray area where nothing feels fully fake, but nothing feels fully honest either. And that gray area is catnip for online audiences. People started revisiting
older TI clips too, trying to figure out whether this kind of behavior matched a pattern. And once they did that, a lot of them started saying the same thing. TI tends to get loudest when the perception battle matters most. Not always when the issue is biggest, but when the optics are getting ugly. And if that read is fair, then this whole 50 Cent situation starts looking less like a random outburst and more like a familiar emergency response. Almost like he heard the city's name getting dragged and jumped in front of the camera out of instinct. That still does not prove anything, obviously, because again, this is commentary and internet theory, not some confirmed behind-the-scenes confession. But when enough people are all arriving at the same suspicion from different angles, the story gains its own momentum, and that is what happened here. It stopped being "did T.I. say this?" and became "why did he say it when he said it?" That question is everything. Because if timing is the real story, then every piece around it matters. The fan mood, the blog cycles, the names being discussed, the pressure on Atlanta, the perception around Young Thug, the side-eye on 21 Savage, all of it starts looking like background smoke behind one very convenient foreground fire. And then came the comments about Gunna. That made everything even touchier, because anytime that broader Atlanta conversation drifts toward loyalty, reconciliation, and who people think should or should not be welcomed back into certain spaces, emotions get nasty immediately. Fans stop being casual and start acting like prosecutors. Everybody suddenly has a code. Everybody suddenly has rules. Everybody suddenly wants to decide who is authentic and who is moving funny. And once that kind of energy is in the air, one wrong public move can make a whole city look unstable in the eyes of the internet. That is exactly why some people think T.I. may have panicked. Not literally panicked in a weak sense, but panicked in the sense of seeing a perception storm forming and deciding something loud had to happen before the entire conversation hardened into one ugly narrative. Because once the internet locks a city into a joke or a label, it is hard to undo. And Atlanta, for all its dominance, is still sensitive to how it is framed publicly when it comes to toughness, loyalty, and authenticity. Those things matter in hip-hop, whether people admit it or not. So if T.I. felt like the city was starting to look compromised in the public eye, he may have genuinely believed he had to swing at something visible and symbolic. And what is more symbolic than 50 Cent? He's not Atlanta. He's not Southern politics. He's not entangled in the same local emotional web. He's the perfect outside target. Somebody loud enough to fight publicly, famous enough to guarantee attention, and distant enough that the conflict can feel huge without becoming too dangerous too fast. That is why some fans think 50 was not chosen by accident. He was chosen because he made sense for the role. Which is crazy to even say out loud, but once that thought gets in your head, it is hard to ignore. Because if 50 was the perfect target, then this was not just a reaction, it was casting. And if it was casting, then fans are not just watching a feud, they are watching a production. That is why even people who do not fully believe the theory still can't stop talking about it, because whether the beef was fake, exaggerated, emotional, strategic, or some ugly mix of all four, it clearly touched a nerve that was already there. This was not one random internet fight falling from the sky. It landed on top of tension that had already been building for weeks. And once that tension got a face, a villain, and a loud public exchange to attach itself to, the internet did what it always does. It turned suspicion into storyline. And that is exactly where things got even messier. Because right when people thought they had figured out the motive, fans started asking a much uglier question. What if this did work, at least for a little while? And that question right there is what pushed this whole conversation into another level. Because once you start asking whether something actually worked, you're no longer just debating intentions, you're measuring impact. And for a brief moment, it really did look like the focus shifted exactly the way some fans claimed it would. Because if you scroll back through the timelines from when this all started heating up, you can literally see the change. Before the back and forth, the conversation was heavy on Atlanta politics, on who said what, on who stood where, on whether certain statements lined up with the image artists had built for years. People were deep in it, arguing, clipping interviews, reposting quotes, dragging old lyrics into new debates. It was one of those moments where the culture felt tense and messy at the same time. Then suddenly the spotlight jumped. Now,
everybody was watching T.I. and 50 Cent. Fans were laughing, reacting, picking sides, posting memes, debating who would win if it turned into something real. And the entire energy shifted from uncomfortable analysis to pure entertainment. And that is exactly what made people pause, because it almost felt too clean, like someone flipped a switch and the mood changed overnight. One fan even said, "We went from debating Atlanta's loyalty to laughing at T.I. and 50 memes in 24 hours. And honestly, that one sentence explains why the distraction theory got so loud. Because when a shift happens that fast, people start asking whether it was organic or engineered. But here is where it gets complicated. Because even if the attention moved, it did not completely erase what was already in the air. It just delayed it. And fans started noticing that too. Because after the initial wave of jokes, reactions, and heated takes, the energy started cooling down. The posts got less frequent, the clips stopped circulating as hard, and suddenly people were not as locked in on the beef anymore. It did not explode into anything bigger, it did not turn into music, it did not turn into a real confrontation, it just faded. And when something that loud fades that fast, it creates a different kind of suspicion. Because now the question is not just, was this planned? Now it becomes, why did it end like that? Because if this was real tension, most fans expected it to escalate. That's how these things usually go. More shots, more responses, maybe even a track, maybe even a public face-to-face moment. Something that pushes it into a bigger chapter. But that did not happen here. Instead, it felt like the energy peaked quickly and then dropped off just as fast. And that pattern is exactly what made people say this wasn't meant to last. That's a wild statement, but a lot of fans started repeating it. Because when something appears, dominates the conversation, and then disappears without resolution, it starts looking like it served a purpose and then expired. Almost like it was never supposed to become a long-term situation. It was just supposed to grab attention, redirect it, and then step out of the way. And if you think about it like that, the whole timeline starts looking even more suspicious. Because during that window, the original conversations did slow down. They did not disappear completely, but they lost momentum. People stopped arguing as intensely, the spotlight moved, and for a short time, the pressure felt lighter. That's why some fans are saying, even if it was fake, it kind of worked. But not everyone agrees with that, because there's another group of people who believe the opposite. They think this move, if it was a move, actually backfired in a different way. And their argument is interesting. They're saying that instead of fully clearing the air, this situation added another layer of confusion on top of everything else. Because now, instead of just questioning Atlanta's internal dynamics, fans are also questioning whether the public moments they're seeing are real or strategic. And once that doubt enters the picture, it changes how people watch everything moving forward. Because now every move feels like it might be calculated. Every statement feels like it might be part of a bigger plan. Every sudden conflict feels like it might be covering something else. And that kind of environment is dangerous for artists, because it makes authenticity harder to prove. One comment that kept popping up said, "I don't even know what to believe anymore." And that's not a small thing. When your audience starts feeling like that, it means the line between reality and performance has gotten blurry enough to make people uncomfortable. And when people get uncomfortable, they either lean in harder or they check out completely. Both outcomes matter, because leaning in means more views, more clicks, more conversation, but checking out means people stop caring. And right now, the reaction seems split right down the middle. Some fans are more invested than ever, trying to decode everything like it's some giant puzzle. Others are tired, saying the whole thing feels like noise with no real substance behind it. And that split is another reason why this story keeps living, because as long as people disagree, the conversation keeps moving. And that is something both sides of the situation understand very well. Which brings us back to 50 Cent. Because while people were busy analyzing T.I.'s motives, a lot of fans started looking at 50's role in all of this a little differently. They started asking whether he was just reacting, or whether he was quietly benefiting from the entire situation without needing to do anything extra. Because if you think about it, 50 thrives in moments like this. He doesn't need a full-blown feud to win. He just needs attention. And this situation gave him that. His name was trending, his reactions were getting clipped. His personality was back in the center of the culture, and he did not have to release a single piece of music to make that happen. That is a win in his world. So some fans started saying, even if T.I. tried to use 50, 50 still got the last laugh. And that idea adds another layer to the story, because now it is not just about whether the beef was real or fake. It is about who actually gained the most from it. Did T.I. succeed in shifting the narrative, even temporarily? Did 50 capitalize on the moment and keep himself relevant without lifting a finger? Did Atlanta's image actually recover, or did it just pause the criticism for a second before it came back in a different form? Those questions do not have clean answers, and that's exactly why the situation feels unresolved, because even though the noise faded, the curiosity did not. People are still asking what this really was. They're still debating whether it was emotion, strategy, or some messy mix of both. And most importantly, they're still watching to see what happens next. Because if this really was a calculated move, then it wouldn't be the last one. And if it wasn't, then something else will eventually reveal that truth too. Either way, the story is not as simple as it looked on the surface, and the more people sit with it, the more it starts to feel like that initial explosion of drama was just the beginning of a much bigger conversation that nobody fully understands yet. Because once fans start believing that what they are watching might not be the full picture, they start paying attention in a completely different way. And that shift in attention is where things can get unpredictable, because now the audience is not just reacting anymore, they are analyzing. And when fans move from reacting to analyzing, the pressure on everyone involved gets even heavier. And once that pressure gets heavier, every silence starts sounding loud too. That's what has made this whole situation linger longer than people expected, because sometimes what's not being said ends up fueling the story more than the actual public back and forth. After all the noise, after all the theories, after all the memes and hot takes, people started noticing the gaps, the things nobody was clearing up, the things nobody was fully denying, the things that were just left floating in the air while fans kept building their own conclusions. And in internet culture, that's gasoline. Because if there's one thing fans love more than drama, it's unfinished drama, something they can keep reopening, reinterpreting, and attaching new meaning to every time another clip, interview, or reaction surfaces. And that's exactly why this T.I. and 50 Cent situation refuses to die quietly. Even though the loudest part of it cooled off, the theory behind it stayed alive because it touched a nerve bigger than just one rap feud. It tapped into the fear that a lot of fans already have, which is that some of the biggest public moments in hip-hop aren't really what they look like anymore. That maybe some conflicts aren't just conflicts, maybe some statements aren't just statements, maybe some public smoke is really there to block your view from something happening behind it. And whether that's true in this case or not, enough people believe it could be true that the story now has a life of its own. That's why even people who were laughing at this in the beginning slowly started taking a second look. Because once you zoom out, the pattern starts looking uncomfortable. Atlanta was under pressure. Conversations around Young Thug, 21 Savage, loyalty, and image were heating up. Fan trust was shaky. Then a flashy new conflict appears, sucks up the oxygen, creates a new villain, gives blogs and reaction channels something easier to package, and suddenly everybody is staring somewhere else. That sequence is what made fans uncomfortable. Not because it proves anything, but because it feels familiar. And in this era, familiar is dangerous, because audiences have become way more sensitive to when they feel like they're being steered. They know how quickly online narratives can be manufactured, boosted, redirected, and repackaged. They know that outrage is currency. They know that one well-timed feud can drown out 5 ugly conversations if the right names are involved. And if they start believing that's what happened here, then this stops being a funny little rap debate and starts becoming a trust issue between artists and the people watching them. That's a much bigger problem than one fake or real beef, because trust is what keeps people emotionally locked in. Once fans start feeling like they're being played, they become colder, more skeptical, more cynical, and that changes how every future moment gets received. Suddenly, nobody wants to just enjoy the spectacle. They want to know what it's covering up. They want to know what agenda is underneath it. They want to know who benefits most from.
The confusion. And that is exactly the mood this situation created. The family was left divided in public opinion too. Some people defended T.I., saying even if the timing looked weird, he was probably just trying to stand on principle and defend Atlanta when the city was being questioned. Others were not trying to hear any of that. They said if you have to create smoke to make the city look stronger, then maybe the city's image was weaker than people wanted to admit in the first place. And that right there is where emotions ran high, because now the debate was not even just about T.I. anymore. Now people were arguing about Atlanta's identity itself. And that is why this topic has such crazy replay value, because it hits on pride, politics, loyalty, ego, and image all at once. Those are the exact ingredients that keep hip-hop commentary alive for weeks. Then there is the ugliest possibility of all, and that is the one nobody can stop circling back to. What if this really was a protective move, but not in some evil mastermind way? What if it was just an instinctive industry survival move? What if T.I. saw the city getting dragged, saw younger names attached to narratives that were getting hard to control, and decided to create a bigger, louder fire because he thought that was the only way to interrupt the damage? That version of the story is not cartoon villain sinister. It is almost sad, because if that's what happened, then it means the pressure behind the scenes may have been way more intense than fans realized. It means the image battle was serious enough that somebody felt a dramatic public distraction was actually necessary. And if that's true, then the real story may not be that T.I. was fake. The real story may be that the situation around him felt fragile enough to require performance. And honestly, that might be even more revealing, because it would say a lot about where the culture is right now. It would say artists are not just fighting for music, they are fighting for perception every single day. They are trying to survive in an era where one clip, one tweet, one weird headline can rewrite public opinion in hours. And in that kind of environment, a lot of people may end up making noisy moves just to keep from getting swallowed by the quieter story underneath. Which brings us back to the question that refuses to go away. Did T.I. fake smoke with 50 Cent to protect Young Thug? Nobody has confirmed that. Nobody is pretending this is some official courtroom fact. This is commentary based on the reports, reactions, theories, and internet conversations that have been blowing up around this whole situation. But the reason this theory refuses to die is simple. People think the timing was too clean, the energy was too convenient, and the fallout was too strangely short-lived to ignore. And maybe that's why fans are shocked, because whether they believe it or not, they can feel that there is more sitting underneath the surface than what was shown publicly. And once viewers start feeling that, they never really stop watching. They just start watching differently. They start looking for patterns. They start listening for contradictions. They start treating every public move like a clue. And if this whole situation really was just a loud piece of damage control disguised as rap smoke, then that means the internet may have been watching a performance while thinking it was catching a breakdown. That is what makes this topic so messy and so addictive, because if this was all strategic, then one thing is for sure. The real battle was never T.I. versus 50. The real battle was over who gets to control the story before the audience figures out what's really making everybody nervous. So after everything that has been said, one thing is clear. This whole situation has left fans with more questions than answers. Because if these reports and internet theories are even halfway true, then what looked like a random rap clash may have actually been a calculated attempt to shift the culture's attention at the perfect time. And that is exactly why people cannot stop talking about it. On one side, you have fans saying T.I. was simply standing up for Atlanta, defending the city when public perception started getting ugly and emotions ran high. But on the other side, you have a growing number of people who believe this smoke may have been way more strategic than personal. They think 50 Cent was the perfect distraction, the perfect outside target, and the perfect headline to pull attention away from conversations involving Young Thug, 21 Savage, and the larger questions around loyalty, image, and industry politics. And honestly, that's what makes this story so wild. Because if this really was just commentary-worthy internet smoke, then it means the public may have been reacting to one drama, while a completely different issue sat behind the curtain. Fans are shocked, the internet is split, and the conversation keeps getting
messier every time a new reaction, old clip, or fresh opinion enters the timeline. The family was left divided in public opinion. Atlanta's image is still being debated, and nobody can seem to agree on whether this was pride, pressure, or pure damage control. But now, I want to hear from you. Do you think T.I. really faked smoke with 50 Cent to protect Young Thug and shift the narrative? Or do you think fans are reading way too deep into a situation that was never that serious to begin with? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this one is definitely not simple. And if you enjoy these dramatic breakdowns, hidden industry theories, and messy celebrity commentary stories, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next explosive upload. Because if this situation gets even crazier, you already know we are going to break it all down right here. And trust me, if more details start coming out, this conversation is far from over.